The rain had started earlier than expected that afternoon. What began as a light drizzle around 2 o'clock had quickly escalated into a full-blown storm by 4. Asheville, North Carolina, a charming, historic city nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains, was drowning in sheets of relentless rain. Water ran down the narrow streets like shallow rivers, filling every crack in the pavement, splashing against car tires, and pouring from the edges of the tall, old buildings that lined the downtown district. The sky, once pale with afternoon light, was now almost black, as though night had arrived 2 hours early. Walter Granger was on his way home from an errand he didn't even want to run. At 56 years old, he had earned the right to spend his days however he pleased. A successful business career had left him with more money than he needed, but very little sense of purpose. Since his retirement 2 years earlier, most of his time had been spent alone, in the same apartment, with the same morning routines, the same quiet lunches, and the same aimless walks that often led nowhere. That day, he'd driven out simply because he couldn't bear the silence of his place anymore. He'd been listening to the news in the car, something about a budget crisis in Raleigh, but even that didn't hold his attention. His mind was elsewhere, wandering, restless, haunted by an emptiness he couldn't quite name. As he turned onto Pack Square, the windshield wipers fought hard against the water pelting the glass. The roads were nearly empty. Most people had taken cover. Walter squinted through the downpour, slowing as he passed the old Holloway bookstore, abandoned for years now, though its rusted sign still clung to the front awning like a memory that refused to fade. That's when he saw her. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, crouched beneath the bookstore's awning, her arms wrapped tightly around a bundle. Walter's eyes narrowed. The bundle wasn't clothes or a blanket. It was a baby. Small, unmoving, cradled against the girl's chest as she crouched, soaked from head to toe. Her dark brown hair was plastered to her forehead. Her face, pale and wet, turned toward the street like she was waiting for someone, or maybe hoping no one else came. Walter's foot froze above the gas pedal. He didn't blink. The red traffic light ahead glowed dimly through the rain, but he didn't see it anymore. All he saw were 2 children sitting alone in a storm, and no one else was stopping. A strange heat filled his chest. Something primal, protective. He hadn't felt that in decades, not since he lost his younger brother in a drowning accident when they were teenagers. Walter had been the one who pulled him from the river too late. The guilt never left. He pulled the Cadillac into a narrow spot in front of the bookstore. The engine hummed as he grabbed the black umbrella from the back seat. The wind ripped at his coat the moment he stepped out, and the cold rain hit him hard. But he didn't flinch. He moved toward the awning with purpose, his shoes splashing through puddles, his breath visible in the chilled air. The girl looked up the moment he approached. She didn't scream or run, just stared at him, frozen. Her eyes were huge, too big for her small face. Her lips trembled, but not from the cold. From fear. Real fear. Walter stopped a few feet away and knelt, keeping the umbrella above her while staying low, making himself as non-threatening as he could. "Hey," he said, his voice calm, steady. "I saw you out here. I want to help." She didn't say a word. Her arms clung tighter to the baby. Walter saw now that the baby's clothes were soaked. His tiny legs were exposed to the cold. His face was ghostly pale. "He needs to get warm," Walter said gently. "You both do. Can I take you somewhere safe?" The girl didn't speak, but her eyes scanned him. She looked at his face like she was trying to read every detail, like one wrong move from him would make her run. Walter placed the umbrella closer to her. "My name's Walter," he said, offering the softest version of his voice. "I'm not gonna hurt you. I promise." Finally, her lips moved. "Lorelei," she whispered. Walter blinked. "That's a beautiful name." She looked down at the baby. "This is Finley." Walter noticed her hands, small, red from the cold, trembling as they held the baby close. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, yet her posture, the way she protected him, the way she didn't cry, it was all wrong for a child. It was like she had been forced to grow up in a single night. "Where's your mom or dad?" Walter asked. She hesitated, looked away, then, with a quiet voice, said, "She left. Said she couldn't take care of us. Said we had to stay here, not go back." Walter's stomach sank. "Back where?" Lorelei didn't answer. Her eyes filled with something deeper than fear, something closer to shame. Walter's coat was already dripping, and he could feel the cold settling into his bones. But that didn't matter. "I know a place close by," he said. "It's warm. There's food. You don't have to be out here anymore." Lorelei didn't move. Her eyes flicked toward the rain beyond the awning, then back to Walter. It was clear she was measuring something. Trust was something she hadn't been given freely in a long time. But then, with slow, cautious motion, she nodded once. Walter took off his coat and draped it around both of them, careful not to disturb the baby. He extended his hand, and she took it. He walked them back to the car slowly, shielding them as much as he could from the storm. The car's heat was already on, and the moment the doors closed behind them, Lorelei let out a breath like she'd been holding it for hours. Walter didn't waste time. He drove 1 block down and turned into a small corner cafe called Darlene's Place. He'd known the owner for years. She was the kind of woman who believed in second chances, and in keeping secrets when they mattered. He pulled up in front of the cafe, jumped out, and opened the passenger door, lifting Finley gently into his arms while guiding Lorelei with his free hand. The moment they entered, warmth hit their faces like a wave. Jazz music played softly from the old speakers. The smell of cinnamon and coffee filled the air. Behind the counter, Ms. Darlene saw them and rushed out from behind the register. "Walter, what the hell? I need towels, blankets, hot drinks. Now." Darlene looked at the kids. Her mouth opened, but no words came. She turned and disappeared into the back. Walter sat Lorelei and Finley in the booth closest to the heater. He knelt down again, unwrapping the wet coat and pulling Finley gently from Lorelei's arms. The baby was breathing, shivering, but alive. Darlene returned with towels, 2 blankets, and a tray of hot chocolate. Walter took the towels and carefully dried Lorelei's arms and hair while she held Finley close again. She didn't say anything. She just stared at the steam rising from the cups, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. Walter sat beside her. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "No one's gonna hurt you." Darlene sat across from them. Her face was pale. "What happened?" Walter shook his head. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." If you like interesting stories, leave your like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all our content. And let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. We'd love to hear from you. The storm was still raging outside, but inside Darlene's place, the cafe felt like another world. Warmer, quieter, more forgiving. Rain hammered the windows, distorting the streetlights and the shape of passing cars, but no one inside seemed to notice. Their focus had narrowed entirely to the scene unfolding in the booth by the heater. Walter sat across from Lorelei, watching as she fed small spoonfuls of warm milk to her baby brother, Finley. She held the cup carefully with both hands, her tiny fingers trembling slightly, though not from the cold anymore. There was something in her posture, rigid, alert, tense, that told Walter this was a girl who didn't relax, even when she was safe. She hadn't said a word since they entered the cafe. Finley had dozed off after a few sips, curled into her side like an extension of her own body. She barely moved, barely blinked. Across the table, Ms. Darlene, still shaken, stood with a folded blanket and a silent question in her eyes. Walter gave her a look, subtle, firm, that meant, not now. He wasn't ready to talk about it. Not yet. Not until he understood more. Walter gently slid a small plate of toast toward Lorelei. "Eat something," he said, keeping his voice low, like a promise. "You need strength." She didn't reach for it right away. Her eyes flicked up to his face, cautious. Distrust didn't live on the surface. It lived deep in her bones. "I don't want to go back," she whispered. Her voice caught him off guard. Not what she said, but the way she said it, quiet but certain, like a child who had long ago given up asking for help and had instead learned to declare what she couldn't accept. "I know," Walter replied. "And you won't. Not if I can help it." There was a pause. The air between them hung heavy. Walter felt something unfamiliar in his chest, an ache he didn't recognize at first, because he hadn't felt it in so long. It was the feeling of responsibility. Not the kind he used to carry in boardrooms and balance sheets, but the raw, human kind. The kind that came when someone's life was suddenly in your hands. He leaned forward. "Can you tell me who left you there?" Lorelei hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Miss Velma." Walter froze. That name, it didn't sound like a mother. It sounded institutional, official. "From where?" he asked carefully. "She runs the home," Lorelei said. "Safe Haven, over on Martin Street." Walter sat back. He knew that place by name only. A small orphanage that had once been praised in local papers for saving troubled youth. But he had never given it much thought. Like most people, he assumed those places functioned as they were supposed to. Now, sitting in front of this girl, seeing the fear etched into her face, the weight she carried, he knew better. "And she just left you?" he asked, his voice tightening. Lorelei's eyes dropped to the table. "She told me to wait until someone nice came. Then she got in her car and drove away." Walter blinked slowly. He had to fight the urge to stand and pace. His brain was already processing scenarios, outcomes, laws, names. But he knew enough to stay calm, for her. Darlene finally stepped forward and placed the blanket over the back of the booth, resting her hand lightly on Lorelei's shoulder. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "how long were you out there before Mr. Walter found you?" Lorelei shrugged. "A while." Darlene looked at Walter, her eyes brimming with a mix of rage and disbelief. "She left them in a storm. A baby." Walter nodded once. "I need to get them out of here. Somewhere safe. Tonight." Darlene raised an eyebrow. "You're gonna take them home with you?" Walter didn't answer right away. He looked at Lorelei again, at the way she curled slightly around her brother, guarding him even in sleep, at the rawness in her voice when she spoke. She wasn't a child in the traditional sense anymore. She was something else now, something bruised and hardened too early. She reminded him of someone. A long time ago, when Walter was just 17, he had stood on the riverbank screaming for help, holding the body of his drowned little brother in his arms. No adults came. No one stopped. The guilt had turned into silence, and silence had turned into isolation. He couldn't relive that again. Not with them. He turned to Darlene. "Yeah," he said. "I am." Darlene didn't argue. She just nodded and walked toward the kitchen, muttering, Lord help us all. Walter pulled out his phone and searched his contacts. There was only one person he could trust with something like this: Sheriff Dean Hargrave. They had known each other since high school. Dean was one of the few people who knew Walter's past, the real past. They'd drifted in recent years, as men do when life separates them into different versions of adulthood, but trust had never been lost between them. Walter typed a message. Need to talk. Urgent. Not over the phone. It's about safe haven. He hesitated, then added, not a rumor. 2 kids. Abandoned. I have them. He hit send, then pocketed the phone. Lorelei, he said softly. She looked up again. I'm going to take you and your brother to my place tonight. Just for now. So you're safe. Is that okay? There was a pause. Her jaw tightened. She looked down at Finley, who had begun to stir in her lap. Will he be warm there? She asked. Walter swallowed. He will. I promise. She nodded once. That was it. That was all the permission he needed. Walter stood, gently lifting Finley into his arms. The boy was light, too light. Walter could feel every rib under the soaked onesie. He wrapped the baby in Darlene's second blanket and tucked him close to his chest. Darlene returned with a small bag of food, in case they wake up hungry later. Walter met her eyes. Thank you. Be careful, she said. If you're going up against Velma Rowe, she's got people. You know that, right? Walter didn't answer. He didn't need to. He just turned toward the door, holding Finley close, and reached his free hand back toward Lorelei. And again, without hesitation, she took it. The drive back to Walter's apartment was silent, except for the steady hum of rain on the windshield and the soft, occasional stirrings of baby Finley in the back seat. Lorelei sat beside her brother, clutching his small hand as though letting go would break something inside her. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't seem to care. What mattered to her was that Finley was warm, safe, breathing. Walter kept his eyes on the road, but checked the rearview mirror every few seconds. He'd never had a child in his car before, not even a niece or nephew. His brother had never lived long enough to have kids. Walter had never married, never even tried. Something in him had always remained closed. But tonight, everything was different. As they pulled into the underground parking lot of his building, he reached for the garage remote and pressed it. The steel gate opened with a slow mechanical groan, and for a moment, the car was bathed in a flickering yellow light from the security lamp above. Rainwater trickled down the windshield like tears. He looked at Lorelei. "We're here," he said gently. She nodded and opened her door before he could offer to help. Walter stepped out and rounded the car to lift Finley from his seat. The baby whimpered softly, but didn't wake. He was too exhausted, probably hungry, possibly ill. Walter had never held something so fragile in his life. Inside the elevator, Lorelei stood perfectly still, her eyes on the red numbers counting up. Walter's apartment was on the 7th floor. Top unit. Quiet. He'd picked it because of the view. He liked looking out at the city without having to be a part of it. But now, as the elevator doors opened, and he guided them down the hallway toward his front door, the space suddenly felt too clean, too sterile, too empty. He pushed the door open with his shoulder. "Come in," he said. Lorelei hesitated at the threshold, as if waiting for some unseen threat to jump out. Walter stepped inside first and flicked on the lights. Soft, yellow lighting revealed a wide living room, a grey sectional couch, bookshelves full of dusty novels, and a fireplace that hadn't been used in over a year. Lorelei followed slowly, her shoes squeaking against the wood floor. She scanned the room like a soldier checking for traps. Walter laid Finley down on the couch, atop a folded blanket, and covered him with another. Then he turned to Lorelei. "Let's get you into something dry," he said. "I think I've got a few old t-shirts." He disappeared into the bedroom and came back with 2 soft, oversized cotton shirts and a pair of sweatpants with a drawstring. Lorelei took them with a polite nod and disappeared into the bathroom. Walter sat down on the armrest of the couch, staring at Finley. His chest rose and fell with small, shallow breaths. He was sleeping hard. He reached for his phone. No message from Dean yet. He resisted the urge to call again. It had only been an hour since the first text. Dean would come through. He always did. The bathroom door opened quietly, and Lorelei stepped out, now in his shirt and pants, sleeves rolled up and legs bunched at the ankles. She held her wet clothes in a bundle and looked around, unsure what to do. Walter stood and took them from her. "I'll put these in the washer. You hungry?" She paused, then nodded. In the kitchen, Walter moved like a man out of his element, because he was. He didn't cook much, but he managed to put together a plate of scrambled eggs and toast, with a banana on the side. He placed the plate in front of her at the kitchen island and handed her a glass of water. She sat, ate slowly, mechanically, her eyes never leaving the baby in the next room. "Lorelei," Walter said gently, "can I ask you something?" She didn't answer, but she didn't say no either. He sat across from her. "How long were you and Finley at Safe Haven?" She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Since I was 5. He was born there." Walter's jaw tightened. That meant she had been there for 2 years, and Finley had never known any other home. "Do you remember your parents?" She shook her head. "No one ever came for us." The way she said it, it wasn't angry. It wasn't even sad. It was a plain truth, like stating the weather. It stabbed something in Walter's chest. "What about other kids there?" he asked. "Were there many?" She stopped chewing. Her eyes lifted to his, and for the first time, there was something behind them. Something haunted. Sometimes there were a lot. Then they were gone. Gone where? She swallowed hard. Velma would take them in her car. Sometimes people came at night. I never saw those kids again. Walter leaned back, trying to process it all. It was worse than he thought. Did anyone ever ask about them? Did the police ever come? She shook her head. No one came. No one ever asked questions. His mind raced. If what Lorelei was saying was true, and he believed her, it meant there was something deeply wrong happening inside that orphanage. Something dark. Something systematic. He rubbed his hand over his mouth and stood up. "You did good telling me, Lorelei. You were brave. I know that wasn't easy." She didn't respond. She was watching Finley again. Walter turned toward the window and looked out over the city. The rain was still falling, but lighter now. Quieter. He could see the old church steeple downtown, silhouetted against the clouds. He picked up his phone again. Still no word from Dean, but he couldn't wait much longer. He walked back toward Lorelei, crouched down beside a stool, and met her eyes. "You're not going back there. Do you understand me? Whatever happens next, I'm going to take care of you and Finley. That's a promise." She didn't speak, but she blinked. Once. Slowly. And in that small, almost imperceptible motion, Walter saw trust begin to grow where fear had been planted. That night, he set up the guest room for Lorelei, pulled the crib out of storage from when his neighbors used to visit with their daughter, and made a bed for Finley beside her. When both children were finally asleep, Walter sat in the living room, staring at nothing, the rain a dull whisper in the background. His life, once silent and controlled, had been cracked open in a single day. And somehow, he didn't want to go back. At 3:15 in the morning, Walter Granger sat in the dark, staring at the city through the floor-to-ceiling window in his living room. Asheville's skyline wasn't much compared to other cities. No high-rises or flashing billboards, just scattered rooftops, the occasional church spire, and the shadows of the mountains in the distance. Still, tonight, everything felt different. The view hadn't changed. But he had. Behind him, down the hall, two children, strangers less than 24 hours ago, were asleep in rooms that had never been used. The sound of Finley's soft breathing came through the baby monitor Walter had set up. Lorelei, quiet as ever, hadn't made a noise since she'd curled up on the edge of the twin bed, one arm dangling toward the crib, like she needed to feel her brother close even in sleep. Walter hadn't even attempted to lie down. His heart was still racing, his thoughts tangled. Something inside him had shifted, permanently. He knew it. The stillness of his life, once a comfort, now felt like a cage he'd been living in too long. And Lorelei's voice, soft and matter-of-fact, kept echoing in his head. No one ever came. At 3:42, his phone buzzed. Sheriff Dean Hargrave. Walter grabbed it quickly. "Dean," he answered. His voice was low, but sharp. "You all right?" Dean's voice sounded tired, not suspicious, just wary. "I have the kids," Walter said immediately. "They're asleep at my place. She said a woman from Safe Haven dumped them downtown, in the rain. And she's 7, Dean. Her name's Lorelei. The baby's her brother." There was a pause. "Jesus, I need you to look into this," Walter pressed. Quietly, Dean exhaled. "You know what that place is, right? Or at least what people say it is. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I believe her." Dean's voice lowered. "Velma Rowe's name is on a few donor boards across this county. She plays politics with the city council. She's insulated. I don't care how many pictures she's taken with mayors," Walter snapped. "She abandoned 2 children. There's something happening in that place." Dean didn't answer right away. "I'll start pulling some threads," he finally said. "But if there's anything dirty under the surface, it's gonna be deep. She's smart, and she's not doing it alone." Walter nodded, though the sheriff couldn't see him. "Understood. I'm not asking for headlines, just the truth. Do you want me to report this officially?" Dean asked. "Because once I do, social services will be on this in an hour. You might lose them." Walter's stomach turned. The thought of some stranger showing up to take Lorelei and Finley away, after everything, they wouldn't understand. They'd think they were being punished again. "No," Walter said. "Not yet. Give me a day. Just one. I can do that." They hung up, and Walter stood in the dim light of his kitchen, fingers gripping the counter. He'd always believed that the world had rules, that good people stayed in their lane, and the system worked, more or less. But he wasn't that naive anymore. Not after tonight. At 6 in the morning, before the sun had even risen, Walter was already at his laptop. He typed "Safe Haven Home for Children" into the search bar. The website looked polished. Stock photos of smiling children. Mission statements about love, structure, safety. Velma Rowe's name appeared 5 times on the homepage. Founder, director, visionary, pillar of the community. But when Walter dug deeper into public reports, IRS filings, and press releases, the cracks began to show. No recent inspections from the state. No updated records on the number of children housed. No last names listed. No pictures of actual residents. Just glowing testimonials with no full names or contact info. It didn't make sense. Most non-profits were proud to share their success stories. This place? It was hiding in plain sight. At 7:30, Lorelei walked into the kitchen. Walter looked up, startled. Her hair was messy. Her eyes were still sleepy. But she walked straight to Finley's baby monitor, checked the screen, then sat quietly on the stool. Walter placed a plate of pancakes in front of her. She stared at them for a moment before picking up the fork. "You didn't sleep much," she said quietly. Walter chuckled. "Neither did you." She took a bite, chewed slowly. "Why are you helping us?" she asked without looking up. Walter considered the question. It was fair. She had every right to be suspicious. "Because someone should have," he said. She didn't respond. But she didn't look away either. "You're not going back to that place," he added. "Not ever." A flicker of something passed across her face. Disbelief, maybe. Or hope. But she pushed it down fast, like she didn't trust it yet. "Velma said we weren't wanted," Lorelei whispered. "Said Finley was too much trouble. He cries a lot." Walter leaned in. "That's what babies do." She said we were a waste of time. Walter's jaw clenched. She was wrong. They ate in silence for a while, and then Lorelei glanced toward the window. "Is the rain gone?" "For now," Walter replied. "Good," she said. "I hate it." Later that morning, Walter placed a call to a man he hadn't spoken to in years, Elliot Ford, a former child advocacy lawyer turned private legal consultant. They'd once worked on a community grant project together. Elliot had a sharp mind and an even sharper nose for corruption. He answered on the second ring. "Granger, I've got a situation," Walter said, "involving a children's home. And I need you to keep it off the radar. You got names?" "Yeah. Velma Rowe. Safe Haven Home. Asheville." There was a long pause. "Oh," Elliot said, his voice dropping. "I've heard whispers. That place is a black hole. Then help me shine a light." Elliot agreed to meet him later that day. By noon, Walter had arranged a discreet medical checkup for Finley through a private pediatrician he trusted. He also bought clothes, diapers, toys, and groceries for 2 children he hadn't planned for but couldn't stop thinking about. And through it all, Lorelei watched him. She didn't ask many questions, but Walter could feel it. Every step he took, every call he made, she was testing him, waiting to see if he'd give up. Waiting to see if this would be like all the other times when adults said kind things but disappeared by morning. He wouldn't, because Walter Granger had just found something he didn't know he'd lost. A reason to fight again. The following morning was crisp and dry, a welcome change from the storm the night before. The clouds had finally parted, and pale sunlight filtered through the blinds of Walter's apartment, casting long, soft lines across the hardwood floor. The apartment had changed, though nothing physical had been altered. It was in the air, in the way the rooms no longer echoed with silence, in the trail of baby toys scattered under the coffee table, in the faint humming sound Lorelei made when she thought no one was listening. Walter hadn't slept much again. He'd been up since 5, pacing, reading, compiling documents, and printing everything he could find on Safe Haven. The more he looked, the clearer the picture became, and it wasn't one he could ignore. The Safe Haven Home for Children, according to public records, was founded in 1996 by a philanthropist named Margot Holloway. Margot had been a local icon in Asheville, a retired nurse who dedicated her life savings to building a home for abandoned and neglected children. She'd passed away in 2013, and that's when Velma Rowe took over. On paper, Velma was spotless. Community leader, active in several faith organizations, organizer of charity drives. But the paper trail ended too cleanly. There were gaps, missing audits, unverified adoption claims, and inconsistent numbers in the census data from the home. Walter had spent over 3 hours at the Asheville Register of Deeds that morning, going through archived property records, financial documents, and internal memos tied to the home. He didn't want to raise suspicion by filing formal requests, so he worked with what was already public. It was enough to make his stomach turn. One file in particular stood out, a report from 2016, written by a former employee. It had been buried in the back of a scanned document bundle, practically invisible unless you were looking for it. The report was unsigned. No official complaint number. But the content was clear. Multiple children transferred without documentation. Unclear where they went. No follow-up. Velma says it's all approved, but no records in system. Staff warned not to ask. Walter printed the report and slid it into a folder, his hands shaking slightly. He didn't know what disturbed him more, the implications or the fact that no one had done anything about it in nearly a decade. Back at the apartment, he arrived to find Lorelei curled up on the couch, reading a picture book Walter had brought from a nearby shop. Finley lay beside her, babbling softly. It was the first time Walter had heard the baby make any kind of noise other than a cry. Lorelei looked up when he came in. "You were gone long." "I had to check on something," Walter replied, locking the door behind him. "But I brought you something." He handed her a paper bag. Inside, she found a small stuffed elephant, soft and gray, with big ears and stitched eyes. Lorelei didn't smile, but she held it to her chest immediately. "I like him," she said. Walter nodded. "His name is up to you." She glanced at Finley. "Maybe something that sounds strong." Walter sat down beside them, still holding the folder. He watched Lorelei gently pat the elephant's head as Finley reached for its trunk with sleepy fingers. "There's something I need to ask you," Walter said slowly. She looked up, alert in an instant. This might sound strange, but when the other kids at Safe Haven left, did anyone ever say goodbye to them? Were they packed? Or was it sudden? Lorelei's eyes darkened. She nodded slowly. It was always quick. Miss Velma would come in with someone. She'd call the kid by name. They'd go into her office. Sometimes they came out with bags. Sometimes they didn't. Walter felt a chill down his spine. And the ones who didn't come back? No one asked where they were? "No," she said. "If we asked too much, we'd get chores. Or be locked in the quiet room." Walter raised an eyebrow. "Quiet room." She pointed to a small closet in the hallway. "Like that. No lights. No window." Walter clenched his fists. "Did that happen to you?" She hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. He leaned back in the chair, taking a deep breath. He wasn't a violent man. But if Velma Rowe were standing in front of him now... He opened the folder and showed her the printed report, the one from the former staff member. "Do you recognize this name?" he asked, pointing to a scribbled signature that had nearly faded. Lorelei squinted. "That's Jasper." Walter's pulse quickened. "Jasper Reed. Yeah. He used to work in the kitchen. He was nice." He got fired after he tried to stop Velma from yelling at one of the little boys. Then he disappeared. Walter sat up. Jasper wasn't a ghost. He was real. And if he was out there, he might know everything. Later that day, Walter met with Sheriff Dean Hargrave in the sheriff's private office, away from the front desk, away from the eyes of local reporters and staffers with loose lips. Dean was flipping through the same folder Walter had shown Lorelei. "You found this at the registry?" he asked. "Filed like it was nothing. No follow-up. No signature. Just buried." Dean ran a hand through his graying hair. "I've heard Velma's name come up before, but no one ever gave me this. No one ever made it official." "She's smart," Walter said. "She knows how to play both sides. But there's something darker happening, Dean. It's not just neglect." Dean closed the folder slowly. "You think she's trafficking?" Walter didn't blink. "I don't think. I know. But I need proof." Dean leaned back. "We find this Jasper Reed. We might have it." Walter nodded. "I need you to help me track him down." Quietly. Dean hesitated. "If Velma catches wind of this." "I don't care," Walter said. "She abandoned a 7-year-old and a baby in a storm. And that's just the part we know about." Dean stood and extended his hand. "All right. Let's find him." By nightfall, Walter was back at his apartment, staring down at a wall he'd cleared in his office. On it, he'd begun taping documents, names, dates, photos, a growing web of quiet corruption. At the center of it, the cold, smug smile of Velma Rowe, pulled from a magazine interview 10 years prior. He heard small footsteps behind him. Lorelei stood in the doorway, holding her stuffed elephant. "Are you building something?" she asked. Walter looked at the wall. "I'm building the truth." She didn't ask why. She didn't ask how. She just nodded and said, "Good." Then she turned and went back to bed. Walter stood there a moment longer, staring at the name in bold print at the center of the web. Velma Rowe. He would take her down, no matter how long it took. For 2 full days, Walter and Dean worked in near silence, communicating only through encrypted messages and secure phone lines. They had both seen enough cases fall apart because of a careless word, a leaked tip, or the wrong person overhearing the right thing. But this wasn't just a case, at least not for Walter. This was personal. Sheriff Dean Hargrave had assigned one of his most trusted deputies, Clara Voss, to comb through old employment records, looking for anything connected to Jasper Reed, the man Lorelei remembered from the kitchen. A man who'd once tried to stand up to Velma Rowe and was promptly fired, then seemingly erased from the record. On the 3rd morning, Clara found him. A forwarding address from 2017 in the small town of Silver, about an hour southwest of Asheville. A rundown area tucked deep in the Appalachian foothills, full of empty lots, trailer homes, and people who kept to themselves. Dean warned Walter, "If Jasper's been hiding this long, there's a reason. He's scared. Don't push him too fast." But Walter wasn't going to wait. He drove to Silver that afternoon in his truck, leaving Lorelei and Finley with Darlene, who had insisted on helping once she learned the scope of what was happening. She had turned her modest cafe into something of a safe house, keeping the blinds drawn and the front door locked when they were inside. The world had no idea yet, but Darlene was preparing for war. Walter took the old back roads into Jackson County, winding through thick trees and quiet hills that seemed untouched by time. Jasper's address led him to a weathered double-wide trailer at the end of a dirt road, half covered in overgrown brush. There was no mailbox, no doorbell, just a screen door and a faded sticker on the window that read, "Keep out." He parked, waited, then approached. He knocked twice, firm but respectful. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then the door creaked open. A man in his late 40s stood there, barefoot, bearded and tense. He looked like someone who hadn't spoken to another human in weeks. His eyes were sunken, and his hands trembled slightly, as if he were always preparing to run. "Jasper Reed?" Walter asked. The man froze. "I'm not here to hurt you," Walter said quickly. "My name's Walter Granger. I know you worked at Safe Haven. I found something you wrote. A report. From 2016. The name alone made Jasper step back. His face shifted, shame, fear, memory all clashing behind his eyes. "I don't talk about that place," Jasper said. "I don't want anything to do with it." Walter didn't move from the porch. "A little girl named Lorelei remembers you. She said you were the only person there who was kind to her. You tried to protect a boy once. And after that, you were gone." Jasper blinked, stunned. His jaw opened, then closed. "She's alive," Walter added. "She and her baby brother. But they were left in a storm. By Velma." Jasper turned pale. "Jesus Christ. I believe you tried to stop her. And I believe you saw what was going on." "I didn't just see it," Jasper whispered. "I lived it." He opened the door all the way. Walter stepped inside slowly. The air inside the trailer smelled like dust, paper, and burnt coffee. There were piles of newspapers, a few unopened cans of soup, and a small desk buried under files. It wasn't cluttered out of laziness. It was caution. Jasper had been documenting something, and hiding it. "She was moving kids," Jasper said, without needing to be asked. "But it was more than that. She forged adoption papers, made deals with private agencies out of state. They'd come at night sometimes, luxury cars, out-of-town plates, no questions. The children were taken and never seen again." Walter's mouth went dry. "Why didn't you report it?" "I did," Jasper said bitterly. "To a lawyer, to a watchdog group. No one listened. Velma had people everywhere. A week after I made noise, I got fired. And then they came to my trailer in Asheville and broke my window with a brick that said, 'Keep quiet.' I moved out here that night." He opened a drawer and pulled out a file box. Inside were photocopies of forged forms, unsigned adoption agreements, check receipts, and a spreadsheet of names. Dozens of them. "I kept it all," he said. "But it didn't matter. No one would go against her. Everyone's afraid of losing their seat at the table." Walter's hands trembled as he flipped through the documents. Each name was a child. Some were listed only by first name, some with no birth dates. Some were marked as transferred, others simply disappeared. He looked up. "Would you testify?" Jasper stiffened. "I can't promise protection yet," Walter admitted. "But this isn't just about one report anymore. This is about dismantling everything she built." Jasper sat down. "If I do this, my name goes on a list. You understand that?" Walter nodded. "So does mine." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of a distant train echoed through the woods. Then Jasper stood and extended his hand. "I'll testify, but only with someone I trust present. I'll bring Dean Hargrave," Walter said. "He'll protect you." Jasper gave a shaky nod. "Then it's time." That night, back in Asheville, Walter returned to his apartment. Lorelei was asleep again on the couch, Finley curled up on her chest, the stuffed elephant wedged between them like a guardian. Walter stood in the doorway, watching them in silence. He thought about the list of names in Jasper's box, dozens of children who had no one, no advocate, no family, no record. But Lorelei and Finley, they had him now, and he would go to war to protect them. If you're enjoying this story, leave your like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all our content. The night before the operation, the entire city of Asheville felt unnaturally still, like the air itself was holding its breath. Walter Granger stood in the sheriff's private operations room, an old conference space tucked behind the police station's armory, far from the public eye. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting a cold glow over the table cluttered with maps, manila folders, phone records, and a whiteboard filled with timelines and vehicle descriptions. This wasn't a hunch anymore. This wasn't a theory. This was a takedown. Across the table stood Sheriff Dean Hargrave, arms crossed, jaw tight, his badge clipped to the edge of his belt instead of worn on his chest. That alone told Walter just how serious he was taking this. Beside him sat Jasper Reed, visibly tense, his hands folded to keep them from shaking. A brave man, but damaged. Jasper had spent years hiding in fear, haunted by the faces of the children he couldn't save. Now he was choosing to speak for them. And next to Walter, silent but alert, was Elliot Ford, the sharp-eyed legal consultant who had been pulling strings behind the scenes, making sure every step of this operation would hold up in court. One mistake, one detail missed, and Velma Rowe would walk away untouched. "This is a one-shot situation," Dean said, pointing to the timeline on the board. "We move too early, she covers her tracks. We move too late, we lose the kids." He drew a red circle around Safe Haven Home, and a second around a warehouse on the outskirts of town, Hollister Storage, recently linked to one of Velma's shell charities. Jasper leaned forward. "That's where they prep them. The warehouse. It's not for storage. They keep the kids there the night before a handoff. Bathe them. Change their clothes. No one outside sees anything." Walter's stomach turned. "And the handoff?" he asked. Jasper nodded. "Always at night. Always just before dawn. 2 vans, no plates, tinted windows. 1 driver each. Sometimes Velma's there. Sometimes it's someone else." Dean clicked a remote. A small screen lit up with security footage, blurry, but clear enough to show a black van pulling into the warehouse lot just 3 nights ago, past midnight. "We got this from a gas station next door," Dean said. "Same van appeared last week. Pattern checks out." Walter stepped closer. "You're sure it's happening tonight?" Jasper nodded. "It lines up with everything I've tracked. She moves them in small groups, 4 or 5 at a time. She never risks moving more than that in case one speaks." Walter stared at the screen. "Then we stop her tonight." Dean exhaled through his nose. "We've got 3 unmarked units. 1 already posted near the orphanage. 2 more will intercept the vans en route. The warehouse will be breached only after both vans are in custody." "What if she's not there?" Walter asked. "Doesn't matter," Dean replied. "We'll get the files, the ledger, and the kids. She won't be able to deny a thing." Elliot stood. "Everything from the moment of interception will be filmed, logged, and documented. Body cams, dash cams, audio. I've got the judge ready to sign emergency custody orders the moment we get the children out." Walter turned to Jasper. "Are you ready?" Jasper hesitated, then gave a slow, pained nod. "I'll go with you, but I'm not stepping inside that warehouse." "You won't have to," Dean said. "But your statement's going in tonight. Full detail. On the record." Jasper nodded again. They need to hear the truth. At 2:15 in the morning, the safe haven home was still and silent. No lights in the windows. No cars in the front lot. Just the hum of crickets and the low whisper of a wind that promised rain. But behind a set of bushes across the street, Deputy Clara Voss and two officers watched through night vision binoculars, radios silent in their hands. At 2:37, movement. A silver sedan pulled around the back of the property. A woman stepped out, short, broad-shouldered, hair tightly curled into a bun. Velma Rowe. Clara muttered into her mic, "Target on sight." Across town, at the warehouse, Walter sat in the back of Dean's unmarked SUV, Jasper beside him. He could feel Jasper's anxiety rising with every passing second. The man stared out the window, eyes wide, lips moving silently, repeating something to himself like a prayer. The radio crackled. Van 1 has just left the orphanage. It is 7 minutes. Dean put the car in drive. Let's move. At 3:02, everything snapped into motion. The black van pulled into the Hollister storage parking lot, just as Jasper had predicted. Before it could even reach the bay doors, two cruisers boxed it in from both sides. Officers rushed out, weapons drawn. Hands where we can see them. Now! Inside the van were 3 children, 2 boys and 1 girl, all under the age of 10. All scared, all silent, their eyes wide as the rear doors opened and real uniforms, not Velma's staff, pulled them out gently, wrapping them in blankets. 2 minutes later, a second van was stopped just 3 blocks away, carrying another 2 children, both in diapers, barely toddlers. Velma wasn't in either vehicle. Walter's heart dropped. Then, Dean's radio flared again. She's still inside the warehouse. The SUV screeched into the lot as backup officers rushed the side entrance. Walter stayed behind the barricade, but he could see everything. Velma being led out in handcuffs, her face twisted in fury, shouting something about mistakes, about misunderstandings. "I built that place," she screamed. "I gave them shelter. I did what no one else would." Dean walked past her without a glance, headed straight for the files being carried out by evidence officers. He pulled open the top folder. Adoption papers, signatures forged, dates erased, names mismatched. This wasn't a home. It had never been a home. It was a system. Walter turned to Jasper, who stood shaking with emotion. "You did it," Walter said. "You told the truth." Jasper didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the children being carried from the warehouse, one by one. Some were crying. Some weren't. But every one of them had that same look Lorelei had, the look of a child who had learned never to expect safety. Dean approached Walter, his voice low. "It's done. We got her. We got everything." Walter looked out at the rain beginning to fall again, soft this time. "No," he said quietly. "It's just starting." The next 72 hours unfolded like a blur, fast, chaotic, and heavy with emotion. Asheville's headlines erupted with the story by dawn. Child trafficking ring exposed. Safe haven home shut down in police raid. The news broke faster than anyone could control it. Reporters swarmed the police department. Drones flew over the orphanage. Former donors and city officials scrambled to distance themselves from Velma Rowe, whose mugshot was plastered across every television screen, newspaper cover, and blog feed by mid-morning. Inside the Asheville Police Department, a temporary task force had been assembled. Social workers, trauma counselors, child welfare specialists, state agents, and legal teams all working together in a scramble to process the wreckage of what Velma had left behind. In total, 23 children had been rescued. None of them had known each other by full names. None of them had birth certificates. Most had no traceable family records at all. Walter spent those 3 days inside the system he had once trusted from a distance, filling out statements, giving testimony, working side by side with Elliot Ford to ensure every form was complete, every child accounted for, every signature traced. But his heart never left the 2 children waiting for him back home. Darlene had practically taken on the role of their guardian angel. She never once complained. She cooked, cleaned, played with Finley, and helped Lorelei with the basics of math and reading. The back corner of a cafe had been turned into a makeshift playroom, with crayon drawings taped to the wall and a baby gate blocking off the espresso machines. Still, Lorelei asked for Walter every night. She never said it directly, but Darlene noticed it in the way she checked the door, the way she jumped at every text tone, the way her eyes lost focus when the phone rang and it wasn't him. On the morning of the 4th day, Walter finally returned. He walked into the cafe just after 9, the bell above the door jingling softly. Lorelei was sitting at a booth, drawing with a red crayon. Finley sat beside her in a high chair, chewing on the ear of the stuffed elephant. She looked up, saw him, and for the first time since they met, she smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It wasn't the kind you'd expect from a child at a birthday party. It was small, tired, but real. "Hey, kid," Walter said gently, sitting across from her. "You're late," she replied. He laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. "I know. I'm sorry." She slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "We made you something." Walter opened it. It was a drawing, crude but clear. A house, a tree, a stick figure holding the hands of 2 smaller ones, and above it, 3 words written in shaky block letters. "Home with Walter." He stared at the paper for a long time. Something in his throat tightened. Lorelei spoke quietly. "Are they going to take us away?" He looked up, meeting her eyes. "Not if I can help it." That afternoon, in the family court building on Oak Street, Walter stood in front of Judge Diane Kessler, holding a packet of documents in his hands. Lorelei and Finley were not with him. They were with a court-appointed child specialist who would evaluate their emotional state before any decision could be made. The courtroom was nearly empty, save for Elliot Ford, a social worker named Melanie, and a state representative from Child Services. "I'm not a foster parent," Walter said honestly. "I'm not a young man. I didn't plan this. But I'm here because those kids need someone. And right now, I'm the only person they trust." Judge Kessler watched him carefully. "Are you asking for custody?" Walter nodded. "Temporary, for now, until a full adoption can be filed." "And you understand what that involves?" she asked. "You'll be legally responsible for them. Financially, emotionally, medically." "Yes," Walter said. "Every part of it." The judge leaned back in her chair. "You're not married. You live alone. What makes you think you can handle 2 children, one of them an infant?" Walter paused, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wanted to say it right. "I don't think anyone's ever fully ready," he said. "But I know what it feels like to lose someone and carry the silence. I know what it looks like when a child stops believing anyone's coming for them. And I've made more mistakes than I can count. But not doing this, walking away from them, that would be the worst mistake of all." There was a long silence. Finally, Judge Kessler reached for her pen. "Temporary custody granted. You'll report to the court once a week. Regular check-ins with a caseworker. If everything goes well, we'll start the adoption process in 60 days. Walter closed his eyes for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor." That evening, When he returned to the apartment with Lorelei and Finley, the place felt different. Warmer, brighter, full. Lorelei walked through the door like she was entering a museum she didn't want to disturb. She paused in the middle of the living room, her hand still clutching Finley's sleeve. Walter knelt beside her. "This is your home now," he said. She looked around, quiet, then glanced up. "Can I call you something?" Walter raised an eyebrow. "Sure." "What?" She hesitated. "Is it okay if I call you Dad?" Walter's breath caught. He nodded, slowly, then pulled her into his arms. And for the first time in her life, maybe the first time ever, Lorelei let herself be held. Spring arrived in Asheville like a long-awaited apology. The cold, grey skies that had dominated the winter finally gave way to soft sunlight and warm breezes. Cherry blossom trees bloomed along the sidewalks near Pack Square, and children played in parks without coats for the first time in months. It had been 63 days since Walter Granger stood before Judge Kessler and asked to take responsibility for 2 children he barely knew. And now, as the first week of April began, he stood in front of the Buncombe County Courthouse, wearing a navy blue suit he hadn't pulled from the closet in years, holding Lorelei's hand in one and Finley's baby bag slung over his shoulder. Lorelei wore a yellow dress Darlene had bought for her, and her hair was tied back with a white ribbon. She didn't say much, but her fingers gripped Walter's tightly. Not from fear, she wasn't afraid anymore, but from something else. A quiet claim. She wasn't going to let go of the person who finally stayed. Inside, the courthouse was quieter than usual. A private hearing had been scheduled. Just family, attorneys, and the court-appointed guardian who had been checking in weekly. Melanie Carter, the social worker, stood nearby with her clipboard, smiling warmly when she saw them enter. "You ready?" she asked Lorelei. The girl looked up at Walter, then nodded. Finley was in a stroller, dressed in a button-up onesie and navy socks. He babbled to himself, chewing on the corner of a soft cloth book, completely unaware that his life was about to change forever. They entered the courtroom at 10:15 sharp. Judge Kessler, now familiar to Walter, greeted them with a warm but professional nod. "Mr. Granger, Miss Lorelei, Finley." Walter stood straight. His hand didn't leave Lorelei's shoulder. "Today we're finalizing a request for legal adoption," the judge began. "You've passed all background checks, completed home evaluations, and received full support from your assigned guardian and legal counsel. You've had custody for over 2 months, with no incidents and consistent engagement." She glanced at Melanie. "Do you have anything to add?" Melanie stood. "Only that in all my years, I've never seen a transition like this one. Lorelei's progress has been remarkable. She's speaking more, trusting more. Her connection to Mr. Granger is clear, stable, and emotionally secure." The judge smiled slightly. "And Finley, healthy, thriving, and very attached to his new family." Judge Kessler turned back to Walter. "Mr. Granger, before I sign this order, do you wish to make any statement?" Walter cleared his throat. He hadn't planned to speak, but something in the moment wouldn't let him stay silent. "I never saw this coming," he began. "My life was safe, structured, controlled. And then one stormy afternoon, I met a little girl who didn't ask for help. She just needed someone to not walk away." He looked down at Lorelei, who was now watching him quietly. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She just held her brother and waited. And I knew I couldn't be someone who left her behind. He paused, voice steady. "I don't know what kind of father I'll be. I've never done this before. But I know what I won't be. I won't disappear. I won't turn away." and I won't ever let them go back to feeling forgotten." The courtroom was silent. Judge Kessler picked up her pen, flipped to the final page of the file, and signed her name. "Walter Granger," she said formally, "you are now the legal father of Lorelei Marie Granger and Finley James Granger." The words hit like a weight Walter had never known he'd been carrying. He exhaled, steadying himself. Lorelei didn't move for a moment, just stared ahead, like she wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. Then she turned to Walter and said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Can I say it now?" He looked at her. "Say what?" She leaned close and whispered into his ear, "Dad." He smiled, the kind of smile that came from somewhere deep, where pain and healing meet. The judge invited them to take a photo to mark the occasion. A court assistant stood with a camera, and as they posed, Walter with Finley in one arm and Lorelei holding his hand, the shutter clicked softly. It captured more than a moment. It captured a beginning. Back at the apartment that evening, Walter prepared dinner, mac and cheese with broccoli on the side, Lorelei's favorite, and applesauce for Finley. Music played quietly in the background. The table was set for 3. He moved with ease now, not like a man pretending, like a man who had done this 1,000 times. Lorelei set the napkins. Finley banged a spoon on his high chair tray. At one point, she turned to Walter. "Can I ask you something? Anything. Do you think the other kids who were rescued, do you think they'll find someone too?" Walter knelt beside her. "I hope so. I think. They'll be okay now. It'll take time. But they're not invisible anymore." Lorelei nodded. That night, after both children were asleep, Lorelei curled up with a stuffed elephant under a nightlight, Finley breathing softly in his crib. Walter stood at the door of their room, arms crossed, heart full. He didn't say anything out loud. He didn't need to, because for the first time in decades, the silence in his life was full of meaning. And for the first time ever, they were home. 2 years had passed, and while time had softened the sharpest edges of what once was, the memory of those days, the storm, the cold, the silence, the rescue, never faded. It lingered, not like a shadow, but like a foundation, something deep and solid beneath the life that now bloomed. Walter Granger stood in the backyard of their home, a modest craftsman house nestled on the outskirts of Asheville, surrounded by tall trees and quiet neighbors. The afternoon sun poured through the leaves, casting golden light across the lawn where Lorelei, now 9, ran barefoot chasing Finley, who had just turned 3 and insisted on wearing his little superhero cape everywhere. The yard was filled with signs of life. A swing Walter had built from an old oak, a garden bed with half-planted flowers, a sandbox Finley had mostly converted into a dinosaur habitat. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and it was loud. Laughter, music, barking from Rufus, the rescue dog they'd adopted last year. Finley's endless storytelling, full of words he barely pronounced but insisted everyone understand. Walter wouldn't have changed a second of it. The news cycle had long moved on from Velma Rowe. After her arrest and the flood of evidence from the warehouse, more people stepped forward. Former employees, frightened parents, one woman who had unknowingly adopted a trafficked child and then helped uncover the illegal trail that led back to safe haven. It turned out Velma had been running a complex, interstate black market disguised as charity. She was sentenced to 35 years without parole. The trial had been public, painful, and heavily covered. Walter had testified. So had Jasper Reed, who later moved to Ohio to start fresh, finally free from fear. Walter and Lorelei never spoke much about Velma after that. Not because they avoided it, but because it simply didn't define them anymore. What defined them now was Saturday mornings making pancakes, story time, doctor visits, field trips, school drop-offs and birthday parties. A family built from survival and solidified by choice. On the anniversary of the adoption, Walter took Lorelei and Finley to the mountains for a picnic. It had become a tradition now, one afternoon a year where they turned off their phones, packed their favorite snacks, and climbed to the overlook just beyond Craggy Gardens, where you could see the whole of Asheville stretch out below. That day, Finley fell asleep halfway through his sandwich, his head in Walter's lap, his little hand clinging to a piece of string cheese. Lorelei sat beside them, looking out at the sky. "Do you remember the storm?" she asked softly. Walter looked down at her. "I do. I still dream about it sometimes," she said. "But it doesn't scare me anymore." Walter brushed a lock of hair from her forehead. "Why not?" "Because I always wake up here," she said. "With you." There was silence between them, but the good kind. After a moment, Lorelei reached into the picnic basket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "I made this at school," she said, handing it to him. Walter unfolded it slowly. It was a short essay titled, "What Family Means to Me." He read it silently. Family is not always who you're born to. Sometimes it's who doesn't walk away. My dad didn't walk away. He saw me when no one else did. He came back for us. And he stayed. That's what family means. Someone who stays. Walter swallowed hard. His chest ached with pride, the kind that didn't come from awards or accomplishments, but from the quiet, immeasurable victories of love. He folded the paper and tucked it carefully into his jacket pocket. Lorelei rested her head on his shoulder. Finley snored softly against his leg. And for the first time in a long, complicated life, Walter Granger finally understood what it meant to be exactly where you're meant to be. Not by accident, not by obligation, but by choice, by love. And if you like this story, you'll surely love the next one appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and turn on notifications. See you next time.